Picture this. One of the most critical waterways on the planet, a narrow strip of ocean carrying roughly 1/5 of the world's entire oil and gas supply, is barely moving. Ships that normally thread through it by the hundreds every single day are frozen in place. Insurance companies are refusing to cover transit. Shipping executives are telling their captains, "Stay out." Energy markets around the globe are in free fall. At the center of it all lies a 2-week ceasefire that nobody fully understands. A 10-point peace plan that exists in at least 3 different versions, and a geopolitical standoff that could unravel into full-scale war with a single phone call. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow choke point at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, bordered on the north by Iran and on the south by Oman. At its narrowest point, it measures only about 33 kilometers wide. And yet, through this tiny corridor flows roughly 20% of global oil supplies and nearly 30% of the world's liquefied natural gas. It also carries about 1/3 of the planet's urea fertilizer exports. This is not a regional waterway. This is a global artery. If it closes, energy prices spike, fertilizer becomes scarce, and economies around the world feel the pressure. And that is exactly why Iran has wielded it as a strategic weapon. The story grows more dramatic from here. The war that brought us to this moment began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran. The operation, later named Operation Epic Fury by the Pentagon, targeted Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear facilities, and command networks. Within 40 days, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared at a Pentagon press conference a historic and overwhelming victory, claiming Iran had been rendered combat ineffective for years to come. But Iran did not simply absorb those blows. It struck back, and the Strait of Hormuz became its most powerful countermeasure. Tehran did not close it entirely, but effectively choked the flow of oil, sending energy markets into turmoil. West Texas Intermediate crude surged past $90 per barrel. Shipping companies began rerouting entirely around the strait, some going all the way around the Cape of Good Hope rather than risk the corridor. Then, on April 8th, President Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire. In a post on Truth Social, he wrote that the United States had met and exceeded all military objectives and was far along on a definitive long-term peace agreement with Iran. The ceasefire, he said, was conditional on Iran agreeing to complete, immediate, and safe reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. He described Iran's 10-point peace proposal as a workable basis for negotiation and said nearly all points of contention had been addressed. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt framed the announcement as a victory, citing leverage from the military campaign to pursue tough negotiations and create a diplomatic opening. Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirmed the agreement almost immediately, but the details were different. Through Tasnim news agency, affiliated with the IRGC, Iran claimed continued control over the Strait of Hormuz, a point the United States did not confirm. From the moment the ceasefire was announced, both sides claimed victory, each describing a different agreement, leaving the world watching and wondering which version was true. Before the war, between 100 and 120 commercial vessels passed through the strait daily. According to maritime analytics firm Kepler Tankers, bulk carriers, container ships, a continuous convoy threading through 33 kilometers of water. Since the ceasefire, as of Thursday morning, fewer than a dozen vessels had passed. 6 cargo carriers, 1 Chinese-owned oil tanker, and 1 Gabon-flagged vessel, the MSG, carrying roughly 7,000 tons of Emirati fuel oil to India, the first non-Iranian tanker to transit after the truce. That is not reopening, that is a trickle. Shipping executives told CNN that uncertainty made transit too risky. Iran remains in control of the strait, with no clear plan for safe passage. When Iran did outline conditions, they were striking. No more than 15 vessels per day, with tolls charged to fund reconstruction. President Trump publicly rejected the tolls, demanding full reopening without limitation. Defense Secretary Hegseth stated, "The strait is open, though hedging language betrayed uncertainty." Hours after the first tankers passed, Iranian news agencies reported a halt again, citing Israeli strikes in Lebanon. This is where the second major crisis threatens the ceasefire. Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in southern Lebanon, has been firing rockets at Israel for weeks in solidarity with Tehran. Israel responded with extraordinary force. Lebanese authorities reported at least 254 killed, with some estimates over 300 and over 1,000 injured in a single day of strikes, the largest since the war began. European leaders condemned the strikes. Iran called them a grave violation. The central dispute erupted. Was Lebanon included in the ceasefire? President Trump's announcement did not mention Lebanon, while Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, the mediator, stated, "An immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon and elsewhere." Iran seized on this statement, halting straight traffic and questioning attendance at negotiations. Vice President J.D. Vance clarified, "The Iranians thought Lebanon was included, but it was not." Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed, though Trump privately urged low-key operations to avoid derailing talks. Hezbollah continues firing. Israel is striking Lebanon. Deaths surpass 1,500 in Lebanon, 23 in Israel. The ceasefire holds, but barely. The world watches. Now let's get into what may be the single most confusing element of this entire situation, the 10-point peace plan. And the truth is, there isn't just one. There are three. Vice President J.D. Vance explained it candidly. The first version, he said, was submitted to U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. It was so poorly constructed that Vance suggested it was likely written by an AI chatbot, specifically naming ChatGPT, and it was immediately rejected. He described it bluntly. It went in the trash. The second version, he said, came from genuine negotiations between the two sides. It was more reasonable, reflected real diplomatic progress, and this is the version President Trump referred to when calling Iran's proposal a workable basis for negotiation. The third version, circulating on Iranian social media and public access television, contained far more aggressive demands than the actual negotiating document. Vance criticized the American media for reporting on this third version as if it were Iran's official position, calling the sourcing little more than a random Yahoo in Iran submitting material to local television. This is more than a communications problem. It reveals the internal divisions inside Iran. Iran is not a monolithic actor. You have the official government, led by the supreme leader and the president, committed to negotiating with the United States. Then there is the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a military political power structure that gained enormous influence during the war and whose senior commanders are opposed to ending it. A peace deal threatens their expanded power. Beyond that, hardliners at the fringes reject any negotiation with America entirely. Vance highlighted the difficulty of knowing who truly holds power in Tehran before negotiating effectively. The ceasefire persists, not because all factions in Tehran support it, but because the current controlling faction believes it serves their interests for now. That brings us to the Islamabad talks. On April 10th, a U.S. delegation led by Vice President Vance, joined by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, was scheduled to meet Iranian counterparts in Pakistan's capital. Pakistan Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif confirmed the venue, calling on both parties to negotiate a conclusive agreement. Iran confirmed participation. The White House confirmed the U.S. team. These talks are being watched with extraordinary intensity, not just by Washington and Tehran, but by every major economy worldwide. The Council on Foreign Relations, through senior fellow Stephen A. Cook, underscored the sobering reality. He noted that there has been no regime change in Iran. The leadership is no less radical than before. Iran retains the ability to destabilize neighbors and, crucially, now holds leverage over the Strait of Hormuz that it did not have prior to the war. Military action may have degraded conventional capacity, but it handed Iran a powerful card, the ability to choke off global energy supplies. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Kham emphasized this after the ceasefire, stating Iran would bring management of the Strait of Hormuz into a new phase, promising to punish aggressors and demand compensation for damages. His words reflected confidence, not defeat. Economically, the impact is immediate. When Trump announced the ceasefire, West Texas Intermediate crude plunged 16% in a single session, settling at $94.41 per barrel. The Dow Jones saw its best single day in over a year. S&P 500 futures suggested a 2% open the following morning. Investors had been bracing for prolonged war, with oil potentially spiking to $120 or even $130 per barrel. By Thursday, doubts about the strait reopening caused oil prices to rebound above $96 per barrel. Financial markets globally are tracking every vessel through the strait in real time. Gulf Oil's chief energy advisor, Tom Closa, warned that changes in strait traffic will take time to affect American consumers at the pump. California, for example, imports roughly 75% of its crude oil, nearly a third from the Middle East. Prolonged disruption will impact gas prices, heating costs, the price of plastic and fertilizer, and nearly every manufactured good. Gulf Cooperation Council members face immediate pressure. Saudi Arabia reported damage to its east-west pipeline, critical for routing oil to the Red Sea and bypassing the strait. Kuwait accused Iran and its proxies of drone attacks on its territory, even post-ceasefire. Bahrain and the UAE reported strikes surrounding the truce announcement. Iran's IRGC denied launching attacks since the ceasefire began. Diplomatically, European leaders from Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Spain, the Netherlands, and Canada, along with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa, called for rapid progress toward a substantive settlement. They explicitly sought the ceasefire to extend to Lebanon, aligning with Iran's interpretation, and pledged to ensure freedom of navigation in the strait. South Korea, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil and hosting roughly 28,000 U.S. troops, dispatched Special Envoy Chung Bong-ha to Tehran to negotiate safe passage for its vessels. Reports suggested Iran may have placed sea mines in the strait while offering alternative routing for limited traffic. If true, this demonstrates Iran's continued operational control and its willingness to manage the waterway on its own terms, even while signing a ceasefire. Understanding this behavior requires context, decades of foreign interference, sanctions, coups, and external control, from the Qajar dynasty through the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907 and the CIA-backed coup of 1953, all shaping Iran's principle, never again allow an outside power to determine its fate. Explanation is crucial in diplomacy. Motivation drives negotiation. Here is where we stand as of today. The ceasefire is holding, but barely. No major U.S. strikes have resumed. Iran has not formally withdrawn from negotiations. The Islamabad talks are scheduled to begin today, April 10th, with Vice President J.D. Vance leading the American delegation. Iran has confirmed participation. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif has set the table. But the strait is not meaningfully open. Only a handful of ships have transited. Iran is still asserting operational control. Sea mines may be present. Hezbollah continues firing rockets at Israel. Israel is still striking Lebanon. The death toll in Lebanon has surpassed 1,500. Inside Iran, powerful factions, particularly within the IRGC, are actively working against a peace deal. The 10-point plan at the center of these negotiations contains demands the United States has not confirmed. According to Iranian state media, the plan includes a complete halt on aggression against Iran and its allies, continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, lifting of U.S. sanctions, release of frozen Iranian assets, and withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region. President Trump, meanwhile, firmly stated that Iran will not be permitted to enrich uranium and that all U.S. military personnel, ships, and aircraft will remain positioned around Iran until a real agreement is reached and fully complied with. These positions are far apart, requiring either extraordinary diplomatic skill or exceptional pressure to bridge. Vice President Vance was blunt before departing for Pakistan. The president is clear. The deal is a ceasefire, a negotiation, and in return, the straits must be reopened. If this does not happen, the president will not abide by terms that the Iranians fail to meet. Trump himself has warned on Truth Social that all U.S. military assets remain in and around Iran, loaded and ready, and if terms are not met, the shooting starts bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. This is the backdrop against which diplomats are now sitting in Islamabad. 2 weeks, 14 days, to turn a fragile truce into a durable agreement addressing uranium enrichment, the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions, frozen assets, and proxy groups in Lebanon. These are questions that diplomats and scholars have wrestled with for decades. The stakes could not be higher. A successful negotiation could end a war, stabilize oil markets, reduce the threat of nuclear proliferation, and establish a new framework for US-Iran relations. A failure could return the region to conflict on a scale that, in Trump's framing, would exceed anything seen before. At the center of it all sits the Strait of Hormuz, 33 kilometers of ocean, 1/5 of the world's oil supply, now the narrow channel through which the fate of the Middle East may be decided. The Islamabad talks are unfolding, and every development matters. Ships, missiles, negotiations, sanctions, and diplomacy all converging in this high-stakes moment. Stay engaged, follow the updates, and share your thoughts. Comment, like, subscribe to keep track of this unfolding story. Every day, every vessel, every statement counts in shaping what comes next in the Strait of Hormuz and the wider Middle East.